Welcome back everybody. Today we're moving into section 3 of the course, and this part of the course is going to deal with all of the band descriptor requirements in the coherence and cohesion category. And in this first lecture of this section, we're going to be thinking about paragraphs and how to construct paragraphs in a logical and progressive manner. This is something that a lot of people don't realize that they have problems with. It's not something that they think they even need to think about. So do try to pay attention over the course of this lecture, even if some of it may seem like quite common sense. It's something that a lot of people actually struggle with. So we're trying to become paragraphing pros as we look at how to manage paragraphing progression. So let's remind ourselves from the previous section of the way that we should structure the overall letter. So as we saw in section 2, the structure of task 1 letters should be super simple, just one paragraph per bullet point and introduced by one purpose sentence. With the overall structure sorted, we still need to consider an important question. How should we progress through these paragraphs individually and overall in a coherent and cohesive manner? So let's think about that. Let's think about individual paragraph structure. Have a look at these two paragraphs and decide for yourself which one is better, and also think to yourself why one might be better. Let's have a look at the first one. When I saw the photos, they brought me fond memories. I'd like to thank you for all the support and attention you gave me while I was in Paris for holiday. Things like that are priceless, and all I can give you is my gratitude. Although the weather was freezing cold, we had enjoyable moments together. And the second paragraph. The photos you sent arrived the other day, and I have to say they're absolutely brilliant. I still can't believe how much snow there was. I look silly without a coat, but I hardly noticed the cold with all the fun we were having. They also really reminded me how generous you were with your hospitality and support, and for that I can't thank you enough. So both of these paragraphs are communicating the same message, that of gratitude for a friend allowing us to stay with them on holiday and for the photos that they've sent. But which paragraph do you think is better, particularly in terms of the way that it progresses? Think about that, think about why you're making your choice, and then we will have a look at the right answer. Okay, so I have selected the second paragraph as the better paragraph. And why might that be? Let's have a look at this in a bit more detail. Let's start by looking at the worst paragraph. Okay, so let's have a look at that problematic paragraph again and consider why it might lose marks for coherence and cohesion. Here are all the sentences, and here are some notes that I've made. Let's have a look at that first sentence. When I saw the photos, they brought me fond memories. Now imagine that we haven't really mentioned any photos yet. If that were the case, this would be a very abrupt opening. And even if we had mentioned the photos, this still might feel a little bit abrupt, a little bit sudden. Now, second sentence. I'd like to thank you for all the support and attention you gave me while I was in Paris for holiday. Where's the link here? There's no real link mentioned between the first and second sentences. We may want to thank this person in this paragraph as well as thank them for the photos, but there's no sense of link between these two ideas, and immediately there's this discordancy between the ideas that we're trying to put across, and that can really mess with the reader's progression. They're a little bit confused already. Notice that the second sentence doesn't mention photos at all, and notice that the first sentence doesn't mention a holiday at all. Let's have a look at the third sentence. Things like that are priceless, and all I can give you is my gratitude. So there's a little bit more of a link with the second sentence, but the problem is that the second and third sentences don't link with the first sentence, and that first sentence is vital. It's sort of introducing the topic of the paragraph as a whole. So we've got things like that, and it looks like we're referring to support and attention, but this paragraph is supposed to be more about photos and being grateful for the photos, and it's not clear that things like that refers to the photos. It looks more like it's referring to support and attention. So there's again this lack of a link that binds all of the sentences together with a clear theme. The fourth sentence also has very weak links with the other sentences. Although the weather was freezing cold, we had enjoyable moments together. This just sounds very strange. It sounds like an isolated sentence. It doesn't seem to progress very logically from the previous sentence. It doesn't seem to fit in with the particular theme. We could still talk about it being cold in Paris, but the way that it's being done here, maybe I'm hoping that you can look at this yourself and you can just realize that it almost doesn't fit in with the theme of the paragraph, with the community of sentences, so to speak. So you can see that it's not very cohesive. So there's little sense of progression throughout as a result of all of these sentences that don't really have close links with one another. There's no link between, or there's rarely a link between the preceding sentence and the following sentence and the sentence in question itself. So let's move on from here and look at why the better paragraph succeeds. So the improved paragraph you can see here, and again we're going to have a look at some notes. Let's have a look at the first sentence. The photos you sent arrived the other day, and I have to say they're absolutely brilliant. So this opening is not abrupt. It guides the reader into the theme of the paragraph. The photos that you sent arrived the other day. We're giving this information and we're kind of being thankful that they arrived. I have to say they're absolutely brilliant. We're praising the recipient as well. Very clear opening, very clear theme to the paragraph as we get started. Second sentence, I can't believe how much snow there was. Now, if this sentence existed on its own, that would be strange, wouldn't it? I still can't believe how much snow there was. It can't exist on its own. And that is a good thing. We don't want any sentence to exist or to be able to exist in isolation. The second sentence requires the first sentence for context. And that means that it is dependent on the first sentence to make sense. So it has a really solid link. It's such a strong link that it's actually dependent on the first sentence. Now the third sentence, I look silly without a coat, but I hardly noticed the cold with all the fun we were having. Now the third sentence requires the second and the first sentence for context, and it follows logically. So the second sentence, I can't believe how much snow there was. That only makes sense when we look at the first sentence because we can think there was snow in the photos. And we are surprised at how much snow there was. Maybe we didn't realize at the time. Whereas the third sentence, I look silly without a coat. We talk about the cold. That only makes sense when we think about the snow from the second sentence and the fact that there are photos in the first sentence. So all of this is coming together. Everything is grouped together it's almost like a little community of sentences that fit together here. The fourth sentence. They also really reminded me how generous you were with your hospitality and support, and for that I can't thank you enough. Now this fourth sentence, although it doesn't have much of a link with the second and third sentence, it does, because we're talking about they, the photos, and the second and third sentence also refer to photos. It's not quite as strong a link though, but it does link all the way back to the first sentence, so the sense of cohesion here is produced by sticking with the same theme. So we're returning to the idea of the photos individually. So they also reminded me. But at the same time, we are making sure we address the bullet point directives by talking about how thankful we were for the recipient allowing us to stay with them on holiday and being thankful for their support and hospitality. So this is better to put it at the end of the paragraph rather than jammed into the middle, because it's slightly separate from the idea of the photos, but we're still linking it with the idea of the photos, but they also really reminded me. But we're not jamming it into the middle of the idea of the photos. It exists on its own, but it also fits with the overall theme. So this is quite a subtle skill to be able to master, and this is why I think a lot of people struggle with this and they don't realize that they struggle with it. It's not easy, but it is something to take into consideration. So my final point here, there is a clear sense of progression throughout, and very importantly there's a very clear theme happening throughout as well, and there's a clear logic to the way that we've organized these sentences. Now, because this is quite a subtle skill that can be quite hard to master, I've just put a list of points here to summarize. So try to keep these in mind when you practice. Guide the reader into the paragraph. Don't just drop them into it suddenly without any markers. Notice the difference between the problematic paragraph and the improved paragraph, and why one just feels a little bit more gentle in the way that it opens the paragraph. Be wary, be cautious of any sentence that can exist independently of any others in the paragraph. You want to make sure that after the first sentence, every sentence that follows needs a previous sentence to make sense. It needs to be dependent. It needs to have that previous sentence for context. Make sure every sentence has a clear link to its preceding sentence and its following sentence. So there needs to be a link not only with that earlier sentence that came before, but also the one that comes after as well. So there's a nice chain of reasoning. Make sure each sentence has a clear and obvious link to the overall paragraph theme. So for instance, earlier in the improved paragraph, every sentence had a clear link to the photos that we were sent, whereas in the problematic paragraph, a couple of those sentences, they didn't seem to mention the photos at all, so they kind of separated themselves from the overall paragraph theme. Finally, try to ensure that there is a clear logic to the way that you sequence your ideas and sentences. For instance, in that previous improved paragraph that we looked at, there is a reason that we left the gratitude for the hospitality and support until the end of the paragraph. We linked it with the idea of the photos, but we left it to the end of the paragraph because we didn't want to break up the sequence of ideas that was necessary to talk about the individual photo that we wanted to mention, that of the snow and that of not wearing a coat. If we randomly inserted the gratitude into the middle of that little story, there would be a breakdown in logic, and the examiner and the reader in general would feel a little bit confused as to why we did that. That was the problem with the problematic paragraph. So as I said, a lot of this may seem like common sense to you, but it is something that I think a lot of writers struggle with without realizing it. So make sure you just keep these points in mind as you write and progress through your paragraphs, and I'm sure you'll be able to produce very logical, coherent and cohesive paragraphs in the future.